You know, there's something about college dorms that seems to conjure up more than just memories of late-night study sessions and wild parties. It's as if the walls themselves hold secrets, whispered from one generation to the next. Maybe it's the isolation, the way you're tossed into a sea of strangers, or maybe it's the freedom, that first taste of independence from home. Whatever the reason, college dorms have a way of warping reality, blurring the lines between what's real and what's not. It's always the dead of night when it hits you, the faintest sound, a creak from the floorboards, a gust of cold air slipping through the window. You lie there, motionless, every inch of your skin crawling with the suspicion that you aren't alone. Maybe it's just the weight of the day playing tricks on your mind, but there's that itch in the back of your head. You don't want to acknowledge it, don't want to admit that something feels wrong. But you do anyway. I remember the first time it happened to me. It was 2 a.m., and I had been scrolling on my phone, half asleep. That's when I heard it, the door to my closet, creaking open as if someone was slowly pushing it from the other side. I froze, staring into the darkness, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination. But there it was, the door moving, ever so slightly. I didn't dare move a muscle. My heart pounded in my chest as I strained to hear any more sounds. Nothing. The silence was worse. I was almost tempted to jump out of bed, run down the hall, but I didn't. Instead, I lay there, drenched in sweat, eyes glued to that half-open closet. It wasn't until the next morning that I realized my door was bolted shut from the inside. No one could have come in. No one could have opened that closet. Maybe it was just one of those things, a draft or a trick of the mind. But once that seed of doubt is planted, you start noticing everything. The flicker of lights that should have stayed on. The footsteps that seem to follow you, growing quicker the faster you move. The soft murmurs that you hear in an empty hallway, just on the edge of comprehension. You think you're alone, until you're not. Some of the stories I've heard around campus are enough to make even the toughest skeptic reconsider their stance on the supernatural. Take my roommate from freshman year, for example. He swore up and down that there was something off about the dorm we lived in, said it was built on an old burial ground or something. Typical rumor, right? Except this one stuck with me because of what happened to him one night. He was always a deep sleeper, the kind of guy who could sleep through a hurricane, but one night, he woke up for no reason. He said he just opened his eyes, and there, standing in the corner of our room, was a shadow. Not a person, just a shadow. He didn't want to look at it for too long, didn't want to acknowledge that it was there, but he said it felt like it was watching him. The next morning, he looked pale, like he hadn't slept at all. He refused to talk about it until months later, when we were already moving out. There was something in that room, man, he told me, voice shaking. I'm telling you. Something was there. There are other stories, too. Stories passed around like cautionary tales among freshmen. One that really stuck with me was about a girl in the building next to ours. She said she'd wake up every night at 3 a.m., no matter what. But that wasn't the worst part. Every night, she'd see someone standing outside her window, staring in. She lived on the 4th floor. Eventually, she moved out. Couldn't take it anymore. But the stories about her room still circulate, like some kind of campus-wide warning, don't mess with what you don't understand. I think that's what gets to me the most, how real these stories feel. They're not just ghost tales spun for the sake of entertainment. These are things people swear actually happened to them. And once you hear enough of them, you start wondering, could it happen to me too? There's one story, though, that still makes my skin crawl. I heard it from a guy who used to live in the same dorm as me. He claimed his old room was haunted, not by a ghost, but by something much darker. He said at first, it was small stuff, things going missing, strange smells, cold spots in the room. But it escalated quickly. He started having nightmares. Every night, he'd dream that something was crawling out from under his bed, dragging him down into darkness. He'd wake up covered in scratches, deep ones, like he'd been clawed by an animal. One night, he woke up to find his roommate standing over him, eyes wide open, mouth moving like he was trying to say something, but no words came out. Just this horrible, gurgling noise. When he shook him, his roommate collapsed, eyes rolling back into his head, and for a moment, he thought he was dead. When the roommate finally came to, he had no memory of what happened. But after that night, neither of them slept with the lights off. I don't know if I believe all these stories, but I know one thing: something about dorm life makes you question the boundaries of reality. Whether it's the shadows that lurk in the corners of your room, the strange figures you see at the end of dark hallways, or the whispers you hear just before you fall asleep, one thing's for sure: college is full of things that go bump in the night. So next time you're up late, lying in bed, and you hear a sound you can't explain, ask yourself, are you really alone?